Welcome back, Honors. All right, well, good to see you again. We have survived our first green and white day of the year. I only emphasize survive because I had to teach 3 classes today, but it's okay because y'all got out early, right? It was good stuff. We got a lot done. We crushed it. Y'all presented your Egyptian culture projects. We talked about the second intermediate to the third intermediate period, right? With a little bit of like New Kingdom spice up in there. And then we're going to kind of move into something a little bit different. Now, of course, I did just lie a little bit because I don't really know if we survived our green and white day or not yet because it's currently 7:01 in the morning. So, theoretically speaking, we will survive our first green and white day. And we will get all these things done. Now, the plan was to play a review game, right, today. And, you know, if something occurred or that didn't happen or whatever, I apologize, but it is what it is. All right, so trying to fit 1,000 things into only 82 minutes is pretty tough. But let's get into it, shall we? So we started talking about a bunch of major groups that affected the Egyptians, right? We started talking about like how the Hyksos or the Hyksos, or however, whatever historian wants to call them or wants to say their names, says their names. But we talked about them and their impact and how like they might have been an invading horde or they might have been just a nomadic group. We really, really don't know. And a lot of it's kind of like media spin, I guess you could say, about the Egyptians. Then we talked about the New Kingdom and Egyptian imperialism and like the 18th dynasty, right? And it's a massive success. Tutankhamun. Now, we talked about all those things, right? And then we got to the third intermediate where they were destroyed by the Hittites, right? So, well, let's get into kind of the aftermath of all that stuff. And what's going to lead us into some smaller kingdoms of the East. And then we'll have Assyria and Persia, which we'll finish by early next week, which means your first test is going to be next week. Oh my God. All right, you'll be fine, but please don't worry. We should worry a little bit because my tests are pretty difficult, but you'll do well, okay? So let's get into it, shall we? Now, we saw the fall of the Egyptians, right? So here's the thing. We had 2 massive powers that were kind of making their way, right? Really, really playing it like being the powerful one of all the ancient like societies. We had the Mesopotamians, we had the Egyptians, and some of y'all are immediately, like Katie over there in the background, is like, excuse me, Mr. Terry, but the Mesopotamians are not an empire at all. They are just a series of independent city-states, and Mesopotamia is an area of which they sought to control. All right, Katie, calm down. I understand that you're going to be a doctor one day, or a doctorate, or a rocket scientist, whatever, right? And you're not wrong, but when we're looking at like the Mesopotamian on the whole, right, we could kind of theoretically call them a great power, right? Because all their different little city-states contributed different things, right? The Babylonians with Hammurabi's code, the Sumerians with cuneiform, the Sumerians with ziggurats, the Sumerians with the wheel and the plow, the Akkadians with Sargon the Great and political like centralization, like organized militaries, Nebuchadnezzar, like kicking butt, doing his thing. You could say they contributed a lot. Sesame seeds, even though they're kind of gross. Whereas the Egyptians also contributed a massive unique culture, a gnome system, a centralized government, a bureaucracy, mummification, embalming, theories of like balance in society, like ideas of the family, the calendar system, right? 2 amazing things. I would ask you which one did it better. If I had to pick, I would say the Egyptians did it better, but that's mainly just because when I was a young buck in like 2nd grade, I wanted to be like an Egyptologist. So anyway, now there was also no law and no more wealth in the Egyptian community, right? So the Mesopotamian area is still doing things, right? There's a couple of small little empires over there still like working towards some things, right? Babylon, Assyria is in kind of a fledgling state, right? They're really small and they're expanding. And they're doing things over there. The Minoans and the Mycenaeans are secretly creeping up in the Mediterranean and the Greek culture. But unfortunately, the Egyptians never really bounced back, right? So like they had no more real law, no more real wealth. Their centralized government collapsed. They were broken up into several different kingdoms. The Nubians were down in the south doing their thing. The lower kingdom had a couple of large cities that were trying to govern themselves independently. Memphis, the once mighty capital of Memphis in in Egypt, just couldn't hold it all together anymore, right? And this is mainly because after all of the invasions, the Egyptians were left very, very poor and very powerless, right? Now, due to this, you would think, though, it's like, oh, it's only a matter of time. It's just a matter of time until the Egyptians bounce back. Well, yeah, they didn't. So, and like as this like dysfunction's going on, 3 big new groups are going to start showing up, which are not crazy important, and you're not going to need to know them for your test. But this is just another example of how, like, Egypt never quite got back to the prowess that it once had, right? So the thing about it is, like, the Cushites, the Libyans, the Nubians, all these other people started showing up, and Egypt, instead of trying to use their abilities for their own advantage and then push them forward, Egypt actually just kind of assimilated these people briefly into their culture, but unfortunately they just kind of like meshed together, right? Like many of these communities adopted many Egyptian cultural traits, and the Egyptian culture spread quite a good distance. However, it just never kind of like the moral of the story with this slide is, even with the entrance of new communities to try and bring power back to Egypt again, they just never got back to it. They just never were able to really accomplish the things they did in the New Kingdom ever again, which is just kind of sad, because this is like, I think it's an amazing culture. But then again, if you actually look at it, had they actually got back to dominance and they had a war with the Greeks theoretically, yeah, like so, but it happens. Now, anyway, so the Egyptians have kind of fallen. Well, all the while, the ultimate bro society has popped up, right? So the Phoenicians, right? So the Phoenicians is this amazingly funny little group, which I don't know if any of you are big fans of like Sperry's, but I always imagine these guys being like wearing Sperry's and shorts and just hanging out on the boat all day long, because they're a society of sailors, right? So the Phoenicians never really settled anywhere, right? So they set up small settlements and trading areas are all over the Mediterranean, right? So they are a cultural group that originally originated off of Lebanon, right? So we took our map quiz today. Israel's right here, Lebanon, right? Simon loves igloos, right, Jaden? So Syria, Lebanon, this little tiny country right above Israel, right? We believe that that is where they originated. We believe the Phoenicians rose up out of what is the modern day Lebanon area, right? So, and here's the crazy thing about them. They're just so unique by comparison to everyone else, because they never enslaved, or they never were enslaved by any of the other mighty empires, and they traded with all of them. They were also master shipbuilders, right? So all of the later countries that became dominant military forces that had naval vessels, originally those boats were probably built by the Phoenicians, adopted by these new groups, and these new groups tried their best to replicate them, right? So the Phoenicians were unconquerable in a sense, right? Because if you took over one of their settlements, they would just what? Just move on to the next one, right? They would just go over to like Carthage in North Africa that eventually would grow into a massive rival military against the Romans, right? They would go over to their trading posts outside of Cairo and Tanis in Egypt. They would go all the way out to Spain in the Gibraltar area. These guys were everywhere, right? You just couldn't stop them. But here's the thing. Their contribution to history, yes, granted, like shipbuilding is a massive thing and it's very important, but their contribution, oh yeah, there it is, Tangiers. And then, just look at all that. Look at all the red. So all of these red areas where they would trade, they went everywhere. And trading is amazing and everything else, but their massive contribution, of course, is like the spread of cultural traits, right? So the Phoenicians, really quickly, just so you know where that word comes from, it's a Greek word, which actually means purple people, right? So this is because they were the only people in the world that had access to purple and blue textiles. Now, just so a heads up, textiles is cloth, all right? So like you're wearing textiles, just like textiles, right? So textiles is a cloth. Don't let anybody lie to you like my 5th grade teacher lied to me when Miss Stockberger was like, oh, it's like tiles. Yeah, that's not true, all right? So textiles is cloth, right? And they had access to purple and blue cloth, which is the rarest colors that anyone had. Now, there are theories to this. Some historians believe that there's actually a snail that they actually knew that existed in like tide pools and low waters in certain areas, and they would actually crush their shells up and create dye out of that. Now, no one's ever really figured it out. However, a lot of other historians believe as well, though, that since the rarity of these colors was so unique, that it led to a very, very high price, which purple, of course, becomes the color of the royals, right? So like a royal person or royal, I hate saying it that way, or a king or a queen would wear purple due to its scarcity, right? So now, the Greeks were one of their most popular customers, right? And the Greeks are on the rise about this point, right? There's these little tiny little areas right around like Minoan Greece, Mycenaean Greece, right, that are starting to rise up and they're starting to form their own culture. We're not going to talk about them yet. We're going to talk about them later independently by themselves because they're the first Westerners, but they adopted a lot of things from the Phoenicians. Textile dyeing, ship building like methods. They also traded with the fallen Egyptians, the Mesopotamians, the Hittites, everybody, right? Bringing their best skills to the world, right? Cultural diffusion, best word ever, all right? The spread of culture through war and trade. Just say it one time. Yes. Now, anyway, so their biggest contribution, though, not to be messed up and be considered that it was like named after them, is the phonetic alphabet, right? So their largest impact on history is the phonetic alphabet. After trading with so many different people, the Phoenicians had to create a system to where all of their boats could communicate with one another, all of their trading areas could communicate with one another, all of the people they were trading with could communicate with them, and as well as just like infrastructure, right? Accounting, tabulating, history like recording, like again, accounting, right? These people were all about making money and trading as much as possible. Not necessarily money, but like bartering, right? So the phonetic alphabet is an alphabet based on sound, right? So here's the thing. Phonetic alphabets and phonetic languages are based in something called phonemes, right? Phonemes, right? So phonemes, let's find a phoneme up here, shall we? Here we go. All right, so now, phonemes are a very, very big deal, and they make complete sense, all right? See this word sarcophagus, whenever we were talking about like the Egyptian burial process, mummification, stuff like that? So there are several different phonemes within this, right? So S makes an S sound, A, R, C, O. All these things are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different phonemes, right? Each letter having its own independent sound that all those sounds go together to make a word that has a definition that means a certain concept, right? Now, there are other different languages as well. When we talked about like cuneiform and the Mesopotamians, there's like ideograms, there's there's pictograms, right? So a lot of other historians have begun to call these things syllabries as well as logograms, right? Like, for example, a logogram is like this. See? What does that mean? Percent, right? That symbol means a whole word. And then there are syllabries, which is much more like Asiatic writing, as you can see there in the back, where each symbol means a specific or syllable of a word, as a grouping of letters, right? Now, the fun part about this is several different phonemes that actually this was started by the Phoenicians, right? That's a separate phoneme, right? PH has its own sound, because you wouldn't say sarcophagus, like, so that is a different phoneme. So, phoneme system is a very, very good one. It's one that we still constantly use now. It's one you're using right now to listen to me, understand me, write these things down, right? So don't write down the entire alphabet. It's not that big of a deal. Now, the Phoenician alphabet, though, funny enough, was missing a couple of things. So it was 20-something letters, all consonants, right? So all consonants, no vowels. When the Greeks got a hold of it later on, they were the first ones to actually add some vowels, right? So see, right here, we added epsilon, right? And then, not we, or maybe I am like a time traveler, maybe I was there. But the Phoenician alphabet, as you can tell, it went like several different letters, all, like I said, all consonants, right? And then the Greeks would add, vowels later on. So then, of course, the Phoenicians are living their lives, kicking butt, doing their thing, trading all over the place. Now, then you had the rise of another smaller community, right? The children of Israel, as many of them are called. Now, big debauchery and debacle about this whole thing is what we talked about today in class in the second intermediate. We're not sure if the Hyksos were like, maybe they were the first Israelites. We don't know. So the Hittites, though, are going to fall later on due to weak leaders, right? So, and also due to the Bronze Age collapse. We will talk about the Hittites more in depth later on when we get to the Greeks. I'm not doing it right now, all right? So just so you know, there were these people called the Hittites, right? You can underline their name and circle them real quick. Just be like, Hittites. Now, they fell due to weak leaders, right? Egypt's out of the picture. This is going to give way to a ton of other small states being established. One of them is south of the Phoenician area in Lebanon, which arises of the Hebrews, right? So the Hebrew people, the children of Israel, right? The only historic text of these people that we really have is, of course, like their modern day holy book, right? Their earliest settlements, which are documented in like the Torah. It's not actually their holy book, all right? So the Torah is 1/3 of their holy book. So don't even write that yet. We're going to get into that much more in depth tomorrow, all right? So, yeah, I don't want to talk about that either. All right, so now, their book is actually called the Tanakh, all right? So we'll talk about that later, though. The biggest thing, game changer about them, is they're the very first monotheistic culture, right? They believed in one God instead of being polytheistic. And now no one really knows where they came from, but we believe that they broke away from a larger group in Syria, or possibly broke off from the Hyksos, right? Possibly seeking religious freedom. But we're not really sure, right? So we are going to pick up on these guys tomorrow, and we're going to talk about the Hebrew culture and the Hebrew lifestyles a little bit more in depth. And yeah, so the main thing we're going to focus on is their faith. We're going to focus on the people, the Hebrews, what we know about them, their holy book, their structure, right? And some little kind of kitschy things about their culture and things like that. So we'll talk about that stuff tomorrow. I'll see you guys then. Really enjoyed it. Bye, guys.